My friend Jim Kelly likes to ask the question, if everything were easier and more fun, would that be okay? He is the creator of the self-directed change work method, and we're going to hear more about that today on part 2 of our conversation here on the Essential Coaching Skills Podcast. You are listening to the Essential Coaching Skills Podcast, a show devoted to uncovering the systems and the secrets that set the best apart, where you learn how to take your coaching clients to the next level, while you grow the coaching practice of your dreams. So sit back and relax, or sit up and get excited. Either way, you might want to pay attention. This could be important. All right, we are back once again with the great Jim Kelly, and you can't tell this because this is an audio podcast, but I'm wearing my Buffalo Bills cap here in honor of Jim Kelly being here. And then I found out it's a different guy. It's not the same Jim Kelly who was the quarterback for the Bills. Not at all. He even has an E in his name, Jim Kelly. It's like false pretenses, but I figured since we're here anyway, we'll just continue having a conversation. So,
cheers. Love it. I'll tell you about the time somebody mistook me for a Jim Kelly and pitched me on a real estate deal. Was very mad when they found out that I was just another guy. And I'm a big guy, and I used to play football, so it was a natural mistake. He was very.
Did you play quarterback?
I did not. I played basically variations of offensive and defensive line. And
there's only 2. How many variations of that can you get?
Well, center, tackle.
Okay, gotcha.
Tight end,
gotcha.
Nose guard, right? I mean, you get into some of the technicalities of football, but yeah. And then I had too many concussions, and I didn't play my senior year. And my team that I had grown up with was undefeated that year.
Wow.
So I think I helped by not being there. Anyway.
Well, that's not really why I brought you here today, Jim. But speaking of football, I played those positions too in junior high school, a 9th grade team. But mostly I played wide receiver and defensive halfback, which I'm not sure what that position really is. Linebacker, I think, something like that. But my coach called it defensive halfback. That was fun. I was surprised. Didn't think of myself as a defensive player, but it was a fun position to have. Yeah.
A lot of defensive players are really good offensive receivers. And so defensive backs are really good offensive receivers, and defensive backs are a lot of times guys that have played quarterback somewhere along the way. They know how to read the field. So that's good times had by all.
So, Jim.
Yes.
You were here recently. I don't know when the podcasts will all drop, so I'm not going to say last week because it might have been a few weeks ago by the time this comes out. But we were having you talk about your self-directed change work, and you and I know that this has been a long time coming. You've been working on it for a long time, and it's kind of, are you really ready for prime time is the kind of feeling, and it's all really fascinating stuff to me, because we both come from a kind of NLP background, and I've seen a number of people, including myself to an extent, kind of evolve things or develop things from that background that go off in perhaps a slightly different way because of something that's perceived to be lacking in the NLP world, or this is a more refined thing for a particular approach we're going for, or whatever. I'm just curious if you can tell us a little bit about how, in fact, your self-directed change work, came to be. What's the gestation of it? Why did you feel a need to create this model?
Well, there's a couple of layers to that. One of which I was speaking to a fellow who was part of NLP Comprehensive, a guy by the name of Kelly Gerling, that might be a familiar name to some old time NLPers. And I told him that I just finished trainers trading and that I was interested, and we have a mutual friend, and so he said, well, if you want to be an NLP trainer, there is a lot of opportunity in the NLP world to look at various aspects of NLP and get really good at training that. And he said, so that's what he apparently had done in his consulting business. So I hung up from that call. I thanked him for that input, of course. And I hung up from that call and I asked myself, what's the one question that I struggle with the most? And let's see if I can figure out where to go with NLP from that and what to train. Because NLP is eclectic and it is ecumenical. And the knowledge base of NLP is much broader than this sort of, salesy approach that is kind of, transactional with a lot of, seems like with a lot of trainers today. I don't know. I just really felt strongly that my core question was, if my life were easier and I could be having a better time, would I be okay? Would I be able to be okay? Because at the base of it, I really felt like I was lost and I didn't know what to do. So people, that work with me hear me say, hey, once upon a time, I felt like I was lost and I didn't know what to do. Is that kind of what are the feelings that you're bringing to this session? I was lost and I didn't know what to do. And so I kind of put that statement, I'm lost and I don't know what to do, together with this question of like, how can I be okay? And how can I have more ease of use in my life, more grace? And how can I have more pleasant experience and have things be more fun? Mm-hmm. So I came up with this sort of hook question that I asked, at the beginning. You've heard me say it many times. If everything were easier and more fun, would that be okay? And I know if there are defenses on board or if there's intellectual engagement happening, depending upon how people answer that question, right? Mm-hmm. They may just not be engaged, but they may also be so guarded and so defended that they really don't want to answer that question. So they use a throwaway answer. They're like, well, of course, what a ridiculous question. I'm like, really? So how are you going to do it? How are you going to make things easier for yourself? How are you going to have more fun? And how are you going to be okay? Because you only got this much time and then this incarnation is over. So what are you going to do? So I took what I had learned in NLP, going all the way back to the story I told you last time about, kind of getting involved with hypnosis tools from my mother and from my great uncle Alden, and being raised in that, and then coming across, the primer of Jungian psychology and, getting, Psychology Today and all that stuff. And then I got my first NLP book in 1977. Right. And I'm still stuck with that. How can NLP support therapeutic alliances and support getting people moved from A to B? What kind of resources do we have to put in there? So that's where the self-directed change work method came up, because why? If we're going to get anywhere, we have to do it for ourselves. Certainly we all need help. We're social beings. But where are we going to get that direction from? We have to develop the tools to self-direct, just like when a child is learning how to self-soothe or learning how to tie their shoes. So that's where it came from for me. Kind of a long answer, but I really wanted to find a tool that could kind of access the NLP intention and really make it back into kind of that therapeutic alliance that really, coaches and therapists want to have, and the therapeutic alliance that a person who's trying to change can have with themselves and offer themselves the benefit of their best efforts.
Okay, cool. Love it. Yeah, that's a very nice answer, actually. So last time you were here, we were also asking other questions about outcomes and goals and various other things that I was wondering if you wanted to say anything about what's the difference between in your mind, between an outcome and a goal, and would you approach them differently?
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate, when we were talking about coaching tools last time, and you said if you had to offer one thing to a new coach, what would it be? And I said, get a really good grasp on well-formed outcomes.
Uh-huh.
Now, I could have said, get a really good grasp on the 4 pillars of NLP, the all-important rapport and breaking rapport with the problem and making rapport with the solution, but also the interpersonal rapport of the coach therapist with the client seeker. And so we listed off, you and I, when we were talking, we listed off, a couple of features of well-formed outcomes, and I intentionally left 2 features out. So, and then I realized, oops, I've just sailed off into the weeds here because I didn't mention time and I didn't mention use of the senses. I was kind of more thinking about semantic well-formedness and how we develop an outcome. So right. I also had mentioned last time we talked about how the self-directed change work method is more about process than goal setting.
Mm-hmm.
If you do a goal setting session, you can pull out your SMART goals, strategic, measurable, that whole deal.
Yep.
But realistic, time bound, the whole thing, that's a goal. And that's something that's very linear. I was at a John Overdorf seminar in his humanistic neuro-linguistic psychology thing.
Mm-hmm.
And he was talking about how this idea of going beyond goals. So I started to think about goals versus outcomes. And sometimes you get outcomes that are highly desirable when you're going for a goal, but if you get too directed to a goal, you might miss some of the outcomes that you could get. So I'm really interested in how people feel and how do you feel when this is going? What's your experience like? We talked about metaphors last time. And so I really feel that goals have outcomes as a feature, but outcomes don't necessarily have goals as a feature. They could be something else. And so I was talking to my wife about it, and she said, give me an example. And so kids, cover your ears because I'm about to say it. I said, Viagra. And she said, what? And I said, Viagra. They were testing it as a heart medicine for atrial fibrillation or some darn thing, circulation. And the people in the placebo group didn't realize that the people in the non-placebo group were having a breakthrough of a lifetime in their marriages. Right. And so, it's like, wow, I'm 60 years old and my wife's a kid to me again, it's a happy day. And then they, then when the test was over, this is all documented story, right? When the test was over, the people who were in the non-placebo group were like, where can I get more heart medicine, right? So I'm doing air quotes again. And so the outcome was what's the, other than champagne, what's one of the most popular drugs on Valentine's Day? So it kind of was heart medicine, wasn't it?
Oh, dear.
But it didn't really do what they were looking for in the cardiac rehabilitation world. So the outcome was very positive, and the outcome was heart related, but it wasn't as a heart medicine. So sometimes the goal doesn't meet John Overdorf talked about a person who sets a goal to have $5 million by the time they're 50 years old and a house at the lake. And then they get to be 50 years old and they got $5 billion and they got a house at the lake, but they've got no relationships. They've got no friends. They've totally blown out their lives to get this goal happening. When in fact, if they had been more outcome oriented, then they could kind of go more stepwise, or one kind of cool metaphor is an exercise called the 3-foot toss. And the 3-foot toss is that if you give me three rings and a basket that's 3 feet away, I could get all 3 of those rings in there like pretty much 100%.
Yeah.
But if you set one out there 10 years and you have 3 rings and you got to lob it, you may not get anywhere near that darn basket because it's too far away.
Right.
So an outcome could be like, okay, we're working towards having, $5 million by the time we're 50. We're working towards having a house at the lake, but we're also working on having satisfying relationships, a sense of stability that's positive and constructive, and that everything's okay. I'm okay. The people around me are okay. I'm a net contributor in my life. I'm surrounded by other net contributors. So the goal may have been met to get the house at the lake and the $5 million, but I also made sure that I brought everything else along with me.
Great. And it struck me also that when we've just talked about your self-directed change work, that it is really attempting to get back into that kind of human wholeness rather than just a single transactional thing. You do this to get that kind of thing that NLP can be, often is treated as such of that sort of thing. Is that
it's tempting?
Yeah.
Is that what?
Is that basically accurate? Is that where one of the outcomes of self-directed change work is to?
Once again, you've proven yourself an excellent listener, because that's what I've been talking about, is this whole person thing. Yeah. It's bringing all the parts along for the ride instead of just putting one part of me in charge and having that just blow everything else out.
Right.
So, yeah, I really do like the integration approach, and self-directed change work method is very, very focused on saying, okay, we've got all these undifferentiated parts of our experience. Let's differentiate some of them, see if we can get some definition. Then we'll integrate them together and then link them to our future and our current procedures about the future. It's kind of the Buddhist thing, present causes, future effects. So, yeah.
When you do this process, the self-directed change work with a client, are you also teaching them how to do it for themselves so that it becomes a thing that they don't need you for in the future? Can a person learn to do this, if you will?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes, that's exactly the goal. I want a person. It's like I said last time we got together, I could just give apples and fish and, here's abundance. But then if I stop doing that, then a person's got, all they have is the apples and fish that I gave them. I want to teach them how to do that. Right. Okay. So I've raised kids, I'm raising grandkids with my kids. And, I'm very interested in teaching people how to fish, teaching people how to raise apples, not just this season, but every season, and how to tend the orchard. So, this is a constructive metaphor, and I really want people to learn. So when I'm working in session, either directly or indirectly, I'm always using conversational hypnosis and or things that relate back to hypnotic language. And is that deep enough for you? Don't you feel you're coming up now? And I like to use those things as strategic tools, but most of all, I want people to learn who they are and what they really need, so that their wants and their needs can start to match. I teach them how to do it. I'm really interested in teaching them how to do it.
When you say conversational hypnosis, is it a trance phenomenon? Do you put people into hypnosis? Is this a hypnotic process?
It can be, if I think it's appropriate. Yeah, if I think that's what a person needs. But I'm really interested in the uptime trance, Doug. I've had too many people
let's talk about that, because I suspect there are a few listeners who have no clue what you mean by uptime trance.
Oh, okay. Yeah, because too many people come into the office and stick their hand in the air and go to sleep. They start snoring, right? And then there's this mythology that the unconscious mind heard everything. And yet you give them a quiz about it, they got bupkis. They got nothing. They didn't hear a thing, right? They have no feedback for you on what you were talking about. So I really don't like magical thinking, as you and I have talked about before. I want things that can have a more of a verifiable trail. And so one of the ways that I learned this uptime downtime thing is that, like, if you're in a trance that takes you down towards delta, down towards past alpha into theta, and you start going into that theta brainwave state, you're going down trance. You're having a downtime trance.
Sleep like.
and very sleep-like, very
Yeah.
somnambulistic, maybe.
There you go.
And so that's cool, and it can be really, really helpful for calming, for deepening, for getting a person prepared to take what you've just done in a session and go out into the world with it. And it kind of settles them into a place of comfort and belonging and safety with the materials. So I like downtime trances. But usually when people come to me, they're pretty activated. And I want to meet them in that activation and take that energy and let them, sort of launch into the world with it. So that's where the idea of uptime trances comes from. So and I didn't make any of this stuff up. I didn't make any of this stuff up. This is all just correlations that I've put together and practiced with. But the people can become resilient based on what their attention is landing on. And then they can become even more resilient based on what their outlook is about where their attention is landing. So if we're using an uptime trance, a person is starting to, in an uptime way, visualize themselves like, hey, I'm going to go to the grocery store and I'm going to get some milk and I'm going to get some cookies and and I'm going to buy some Pellegrino and I'm going to check out with Mario and, and it's going to be, I can see myself having that experience. And then they go into the store and that's exactly what happens because it's easy to remember. And they're, kind of the idea that our mind is always in some type of trance. So I remember years ago, somebody asked me, a guy who was a hypnotist, has written a bunch of books, and he said, what kind of hypnosis do you like the best? And I was feeling a little chippy, which I can get, and you've seen me do it. And I said, I like dehypnosis better than hypnosis. And he went, wait, what? And I said, I like dehypnosis better than hypnosis. And he's like, tell me more about that. And I said, most people are walking around, they're hypnotized, they're in the wrong trance, right? They have a phobia, they're in the wrong trance. They're not, and I say wrong, not judgmentally, but because it's not helping them. It's not getting them what they want.
Yeah.
So yeah. So we like to kind of, let's see if we can find the right trance. And we might have to do that by keeping you in an uptime state and helping a person really kind of helicopter view, like, this is the way I've been doing it, then maybe this is the way I could do it. And what if I could do it that way? How much easier, how much more fun can this be? And all I have to do is just like recognize that everything that I'm doing over here has a positive intention and a lot of positive procedures. But then when I get over here, I'm not feeling very good about it and I'm not really getting what I want. So I'm not okay. So that's what I like about talking about that distinction between uptime and downtime. And I think a lot of hypnotists would be, it's just my opinion, but I think a lot of hypnotists would be very well served if they started thinking in terms of uptime trances equally with downtime trances and what they can do to affect change that way. And that's where the self-directed change work method starts to shine. We get a practical attitude, and we talk about preferences, then we talk about your permissions, resources, options and limits, chain analysis, they call it in CBT, and developing a sense of direction. That's all.
Let me just stop you right there. So that list that you just gave, is that like a set list? Is that written down someplace?
That is you will find that graphic on my webpage, changeworksinstitute.com. And it's the pathway. It's a 9-step pathway: foundation, pathway, practice. And I'm really interested in setting a firm foundation because, but when the wind blows, the willow holds on to its roots and the top shakes and goes back and forth. But the roots are set. And so that's why I really want a good foundation that starts with a practical attitude about what it is that you're dealing with, and get some real openness about what's happening and how do you know.
Okay, let me just stop you. I want to come back to that. I want to just go back to, because there is another great therapist in the northwestern territories. Where do you live? You live in Oregon. Dave Dobson was in Washington State, Dave Dobson was in Friday Harbor area, at least.
Oh yeah, that's right. Dave was there. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And he's the first person I ever heard talk about dehypnosis. He said, yes. People ask me, are you a hypnotist? I said, no, I am not a hypnotist. I can do that, but most of the time, what I really find most valuable is to be a dehypnotist.
See, I think that's where I got it from. Remember, my number one claim is I didn't make all this stuff up, right?
My number one claim is I stole everything.
I stole it all. Guilty,
that's
Your
my
Honor.
Number one claim.
Credit where credit's due. Everybody gets the credit. I'm just the current voice. So yeah, thank you about that with that Dave thing. Tell me more.
Well, that's pretty much it. But I remember when I was learning from him, I figured one way might be good to actually do a session with him, because he's teaching all this stuff, but
yeah,
I would like to see it in action, because most of the training he did was him telling stories. And then like maybe out of a 2-week course, he'd do maybe 3 hypnotic inductions in that whole time. And he never taught us how to do a hypnotic induction. He just did them. And then, it was up to us if we wanted to figure out how to actually do it ourselves.
To model his procedure, but he didn't make it explicit. Is that right?
Yeah. So I decided to do a session with him, and I had a particular issue on to work on. And to my surprise, because I expected that I would go into the session with this great hypnotist and he would hypnotize me. Mm-hmm. I kind of thought, well, I know what's coming because I'm going to a hypnotist.
Right.
He's going to hypnotize me. But he didn't. He didn't. He told a lot of stories and just told a lot of jokes. And they were related to what my issue was, but not directly. And,
head scratcher, isn't it?
Yeah, it was like, what the hell? And what I was surprised about was that the issue wasn't that big of an issue when I was finished with that session of his. And
so cool.
Yeah.
Just unraveled it. It just really, really unraveled it. That's really cool. Sometimes those knots get so tight.
Yeah. And it reminded very much of the way the Frank Fairley works with provocative change work as well. It was like tells jokes and rambles on, and like you're in this like open-eyed trance with like, what the heck is going on around here? And you're in this very amazing experiential state with Frank. At least, yeah. So I'm just curious if somebody came in to see you for something specific, like let's just say pulling something out of the air. Hypnotists are known for doing things like weight loss or smoking cessation or whatever. Sure. Let's just say weight loss for fun. What would you say to somebody who comes into your office and says, yeah, I want to lose like 15 pounds. I've put on some weight over this COVID time. And, I put on the old COVID-19 and I'd like to take about 15 of them off.
I went for the full 20.
Can you help me with this this self-directed change work thing you got?
Sure, absolutely. And the interesting thing about it is that depending upon their level of interest, they may not hear much. They may not hear me use the word self-directed change at all. Because that's really kind of more of a moniker for the toolkit. But I want to know where'd the weight come from? What's happening? I really want to know first what's happening.
Okay. Well,
what's happening?
Let's just say I'll play act that not this has anything to do with me actually at all, but let's just say hypothetically, when
you are fit and slender and you go out and run down that road, don't you?
Well, I've been known to. Yeah. So let's just say hypothetically that I came up here during COVID and did a lot of sitting on Zoom and things, and eating. A lot of eating things were happening, and perhaps let's just say hypothetically, ice cream was involved. And,
or beer, or both,
and beer, and wine, and
absolutely,
vodka
bread,
Gin and
good old bread and butter. Yeah.
pizza.
Yeah.
Yeah, lots of things. But just hypothetically, just saying those things. And yeah, so I've let's just say hypothetically, I've quit eating those things,
Mm-hmm.
and yet the weight still seems to be here.
Well, hanging on.
Oh yeah. Yeah. So what might you say to somebody like that if that was hypothetically a situation?
Well, I would really love to be able to ask that person, hypothetically, okay, so up till now,
Yeah.
that's what's been happening. How from here, how's it going to be different?
Mm-hmm.
And my John Overdorf related friends will love that because that's what he calls the move, and he actually has some kinesthetics involved with it. But I really,
What do you mean by kinesthetics involved with it?
well, John literally puts moves into it. So he's like, you look at this hand and you say, up till now, that's the way it's been, and then you swoosh it behind you. So he likes to use the swoosh thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Hey, swoosh it behind you. So now that's back on your timeline, right? And then he goes, okay, from here, and you pick up your other hand, your right hand, and you say, from here, how can it be different? And you swoosh it up, kind of into your visual construct, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, how can that be different, right? Could it be different this way? I don't know. I can't hear myself making a difference there, but look what I see when I do this, right? So up till now, that's the way it's been. But from here, how can it be different? So you started this particular hypothetical with a very good description of the what's happening part.
Mm-hmm.
And you also gave the good, solid empirical evidence about what's happening now. How do you know what's happening? How do you know? Those are my two favorite leader questions. And so in your introduction, you gave me both of those as we started this hypothetical session, right? So my next thing would be curious to just wonder, how resourced are you around this? What is your thinking? Up till now, that's the way it's been. From here, how can it be different? And let's just kind of trance out on that a little bit and see what comes up for you. And very often what happens is a person are like, well, you're not asking me to answer that question, are you? And I'm like, no, I'm asking you to ask your unconscious mind that question. I'm asking you to ask your life that question from the vantage point of now. What could be different in the future? So up till now, that's the way it's been. From here, how can it be different? And that's a great modeling question. Then from there, there all kinds of stuff tends to come up, and people start immediately sort of checking the boxes on exercise programs and weight loss hypnosis and all that kind of stuff. And I'm like, yeah, okay, but how's it going to be different? What are you going to be experiencing? What's your body going to be like? What are you going to be doing in that body? What's happening there? Okay. How are you going to take care of that? And how will you know when you're getting there?
Okay, cool. And is that why you're calling it self-directed? Because you're asking these questions and eliciting those things from the individual that might be different for everybody as you ask those questions to?
Absolutely. Because, as Richard Bandler said, and, personalities are like fingerprints. Everybody's got one, but they're all different.
Did he say that?
Yes. I don't know if he's quoting somebody, but I did hear him say that.
Okay.
And in a recording. And, he was talking about why he loves doing this therapy, why he loves doing this work, because it's challenging, because everybody's different. There is not a cookie cutter person out there. There is no gingerbread man, right? And if there are, they're still different one from another. So yeah. You got to really listen. And I want people to learn for themselves what motivates them. Because by the time they get to the parking lot, I don't know them anymore. I don't know what car they're driving. I don't know where they're going next. I don't know what they're having for dinner. I don't know what their house looks like. So I need them. It makes me very nervous to, work with somebody on solutions that are coming from me.
Right.
I'm not into that. I think that people are organic and people are human beings, and they need to be allowed to design their own solutions. And that doesn't mean I'm going to abandon them in the my dear old dad, God bless his soul, he used to always say, well, you'll figure it out. And, he was right less than half the time. So, Although today he would say he's vindicated because he'd be like, well, look, you got everything figured out. And I'm like, no, I don't. Now that I know all of this stuff, I know less than I ever knew before. But because it's just questions from here on out. But yeah, I want people to design their own solutions. And I want to teach them how to do that by asking them good questions and giving them good procedures. So I've had people go and make a motto for themselves. If everything were easier and more fun, would that be okay? Is this easier? Is this fun? If we work at it a little harder, can we make it fun? Do something else? And they start to model their own solutions. And it gets into kind of a second order of change. Then we'll talk about first, second, third order of change at some point if you want, but not my concept, but I do use it. And I, when a person's in a second order of change, they're not going to go back to their remedial work. They're going to go into learning how life is today. How can this be different? And it's second order, and there is no going back. Just like there's no turning back the clock. I'm never going to have my 60th birthday again. That was one time only, and right. And so we can't go back, but we can go forward, and we can design the future. So past causes, present effects. Present causes, future effects is kind of the classical Buddhist philosophy, the psychology of it. And I want people to harness that, although I may never say those words to them. I want them to harness that, like, from here, how's it going to be different?
Yeah.
What can I do? What's in my control?
Cool. So that's great. That's very, very clear. Thank you very much. And I like also how, it does seem to really be moving. While it's not like traditional therapy where you say, like, how does that make you feel? And it's all about feelings and emotions and having it be honoring and respecting the feelings and whatever. And hopefully then ultimately following those feelings to getting some insights and some enough aha experiences that you can begin to change your behavior along the way. But while it's not that exactly, but it is honoring more the human and the process than it is just having it be transactional. And like you said, I think either on the podcast or to me before we started the podcast or whatever, but that you see a lot of NLP has gone into more of a salesy kind of situation. Is that the word you used?
Well, yeah. I mean, they're selling like, do this, get that. Right. It's marketing messages. Right. And, so I'm kind of seeking with self-directed change work method. I'm seeking to integrate change ideas with the solid foundation NLP started before it became so heavily infused with marketing messages.
Gotcha.
And, marketing messages are great for generating enthusiasm and engagement. But as you mentioned in our last podcast, that it used to be called NLP therapy. And, that was that period of time when I stepped out of the NLP world. I kind of got into some books and I learned about the meta model and, but I was more interested in philosophy, religion, and psychology at that point. And with NLP as kind of the hypnotic background, kind of the structural piece, to me, NLP was architectural. And so I missed that whole phase where NLP became about, going to the NLP seminar and hooking up with people and, going to the party afterwards and all that kind of stuff. To me, it's always been a way to get something important done. And the do this, get that way of approaching change can be a slippery slope. Because the foundations aren't necessarily taken care of when all you're trying to do is remedy. In other words, when you're stuck in first order of change, all you're doing is giving it an aspirin and calling in the morning, right? But when you get into second and third order change where things start to become permanent, and you're like, hold on, I'm a lifelong learner here. I'm determined and I'm ready to learn. And not only that, I'm starting to learn stuff because when I go backwards, I know why I went backwards eventually. I could figure out how I went backwards eventually. And before all of this started, I couldn't do it. It's kind of based on a model from a James Prochaska this kind of classic teaching in addiction therapy called the stages of change. And, when we get to the place where we can actually sort of maintain the new life, but the do this, get that remedial approach to NLP and hypnosis, I feel like gives the potential client an unrealistic expectation of what they're going to get. And it starts to turn into a magic show. And it starts to look like stage hypnosis at the country fair, which can be a lot of fun.
A lot of fun.
Yeah, but we got to give them something more for their money, in my opinion. We got to give them the ability to go into their mind and go into their heart, go into their lives, and actually go, hey, you know what? I would like for things to be different about this, that, and the other thing. But the only thing that I really think I'm going to get a yes on is this. And so I'm going to resource this thing, right? And so the self-directed change work method, addresses that foundation, builds the pathway, and then we start to practice. Then we start to do this, get that, right?
Yeah.
Even though it's still, So
cool. So a couple of things you mentioned that I just wanted to get some clarity on. You mentioned the 4 pillars of NLP. What are the 4 pillars of NLP?
4 pillars of NLP. I love the 4 pillars of NLP. It's just a really useful way of thinking about how to construct change. And I even have like gone through and researched that we could do a kind of a cool training on the structure of experience and how do you know. But the outcome when we're working with somebody, the outcome starts to develop, right? And sometimes they'll come in and it'll be super clear. I have a phobia. I can't drive. I have a phobia. I can't cross a bridge. Other times it needs to be modeled. I have too many relationships that aren't working very well. I feel weird about my life. So we kind of start talking outcome. What do you want? Rapport. And rapport is cool because that kind of gives me the opportunity to figure, kind of start to join them in their model of the world. But I keep my toolkit together while I'm doing it, right? I don't just do full transference and become a carbon copy of them. I stay in rapport with them, their model of the world. I look for their language. I look for how they use subjects and predicates. I kind of try and mirror, match, and lead that. And rapport is really, really cool for that. So outcome, rapport, use of the senses. We talked about that last week. What's happening, and sense acuity and sense awareness. Again, back to good old classic Buddhist psychology. In the 5 aggregates, first there is a body, then there are feelings, and the senses are, part of how they define those feelings. What are you, seeing, hearing, feeling, tasting, smelling, and then what about your senses? What's going on with your intuition? What's going on with your proprioception? Where are you oriented in the world? So what's happening? The senses really help us understand what's happening. And then last but not least, good old behavioral flexibility, how to adjust for better results. Like I'm talking to somebody and we're kind of running down a track here, and maybe that's something that's like, we're done talking about that. We need to move forward into something else. If I'm flexible, I'm not going to keep pushing them. So last time I talked about how we need to stay on our toes with folks, and this flexibility is important because they're wondering if what we're working on is going to help them, and we need to be wondering the same thing. And so the flexibility will help us go, okay, shift a direction, a little to the left, a little to the right, slow down, speed up, gotta stay flexible to be able to gauge the experience. And basically what I like about the 4 pillars of NLP is that they really help with what I like to talk about in terms of the structure of experience. What does that mean? What is the model of the world? How do I do this? It's kind of the general inquiry of NLP is guided discovery in my take on it. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And up till now, that's the way it's been. Right now, this is what is. And from here, how can it be different. And those 4 pillars of NLP, outcome, rapport, senses, and flexibility, are going to help us get that done more easily. And the more we go through that and repeat it with our clients, the more that's going to come naturally to them to do it themselves. It becomes kind of a conditioning thing for them.
Yeah, yeah, beautiful. And I know we're running short on time, and I just wanted to make sure that I also got through that 9-step pathway that you were talking about before, that started with that it's practical
attitude.
Practical attitude.
Yeah. What's happening? You're in the middle of a change process, and you've decided that you can't ignore it and you can't run away from it. So let's move towards. Now you've got a towards motivation. Let's move towards that thing, and let's be practical about it. Let's use a form of optimism that is realistic and constructive, and really helps with, kind of stay in a positive approach to the problem. I have a problem. I'm going to fix it. I have a concern. I'm going to figure it out. I have a system I'm trying to work within. I'm going to do the best I can with it. And we start with a practical attitude that really sounds like that. How do I do this well? It's that fierceness idea, right? Like, I'm going to get this. I'm ready to learn, and I'm determined, and I'm going to get it done. So that's practical attitude. Next box over, again, this is the foundation line. The next box over, and if we're just doing it procedurally, is you can kind of imagine that there's nine boxes, and there's an A on one side and a B on the other, and we come out of the point A and go right through those 9 steps in an S and come out in the direction of getting to I can do this, right? So, practical attitude. Then we want to know, what do you prefer? What are your real preferences? And nothing doesn't make the list if you want it on the list, because the step after that is permission. Okay, out of all those things you prefer, what in this context is going to actually be worth working on? What do you have permission to move forward on right now? And then that's kind of the foundations: practical attitude, preferences, and permission. Then we move up to the next line, which is the pathway. How do we go down the path? So, let's start out talking about what your resourcing is. You have permission to work on this. What resources are underdeveloped, overdeveloped? What needs to be on board? What do you need to stop doing? What do you need to start doing? What do you need to do more of? What do you need to do less of? Classic 4 questions. Mm-hmm. And then that leads to a discussion in the very middle of the 9-step system that I call rules of the road. And that is really your options and your limits. What is your operating environment? What can you definitely choose to do? And what should you definitely not choose to do, or you're going to end up in trouble or not be able to do it, right? If you want to fly from here to Toledo, you got to take an airplane or a balloon or something, because you're physically not able to fly. So that's a limit, right? That's a rule of the road. And once we've done all of that, we're able to say, okay, on this foundation and this pathway, we're at point number 6, and that is sense of direction. That kind of ties into that outcome versus goal discussion that we had earlier, where I want a sense of direction. What am I trying to do here?
All right.
Then once we've kind of granularized that a little bit, made it something we can describe, then we move up into, practicing things and looking for results on demand, changing our focus if we need to, whatever way we need to adjust our focus, and then ultimately be able to say, okay, win this, do that. And that's kind of a playbook. We want a reliable playbook. So that's position number 9, is the reliable playbook. So when you're way at the beginning, you're, hey, I can't do this. And when you get all the way through it, you're, hey, I can do this. And every single aspect, every single box interrelates with the other. So it's a cool mind map. It's organic, and it's a living tool.
So every single box I thought I had a pretty good visualization of it before you said every box interacts with each other. So is it?
Maybe I went too far too fast. But the bottom line is that when you need to focus, you can go all the way back to practical attitude, preferences, and permission. Right. So you're up in the practice line, and you're practicing things that you're trying to get results on demand, and they may or may not be working. So you need to work on your focus before you say, we can do this every time, or we can do this next Tuesday, or
Mm-hmm.
whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And you might have to go all the way back to the beginning and say, well, hold on a second. Our preferences are this, but our permission is that. Our limits are this. Our sense of direction is that. Now let's go back and start to practice again. So it's really a holistic system. It
Cool.
lays out, it's kind of like I was talking about last time when I said it's more like trying to describe a sculpture
Yeah.
than a painting,
Yeah.
right?
Makes sense. Yeah. Got it.
Yeah, because it's a three-dimensional thing, as is your life, as is the hologram of our minds, right?
Yeah.
It's
Sure.
three-dimensional. Yeah.
And it's interesting. I was reading a book recently called something like The Road to Acceptance or something. Dr. Eileen Winokur wrote it. And she talks about how there's a misunderstanding about Abraham Maslow's pyramid of the hierarchy of needs, thinking that, okay, once I get this, then I move up to this, then I move up to this. And it's a hierarchy like a pyramid, and you move up from one to the other. But she said, no, it's interacting all the time. That it's a flexible influx system that you might be at that pinnacle of the hierarchy, but you might be going right back down to basic need for shelter as well. Power outage like we had last week. A number of examples could be like that. Something in your life changes. COVID happens. Suddenly it's very different. You lose a job, you lose a position, or whatever.
Well, this is why I like. Yeah. This is why I like William Glasser's work, because Glasser has what he in 1966 he published his first really comprehensive piece on what he calls choice theory and reality therapy. He calls it unpsychiatry, where he has 5 circles. And those 5 circles are what I use in the basic practice tool that basically take what Maslow did in a hierarchy fashion and put it into a circular system.
Oh, very cool.
And so we can start to measure match and mismatch for survival, freedom, fun, power, love, and relationships. What is my mismatch? What is my match? And what Glasser said in his psychiatric take on it is that if we can get better at figuring out what our matches and mismatches are, then we could kind of do the unpsychiatry for ourselves and say, what I need is what I need more freedom in this area. I need more fun in this area. I need more love and related enhancement there, or survival comes up again. But it's a circular system and it's interactive, just like your author that you were speaking, I was talking about. She's absolutely right. And that's what I think is cool about Dr. Glasser's work, is that it kind of puts Maslow's hierarchy into what I consider to be more organic terms. We live on a circular planet in a circular universe, right?
Yeah, circular or spiral, depending on how you look at it.
Spiral dynamics, upward spiral, yeah.
Or downward, depending. But yes,
been there, done that. Might do it again if I don't watch out.
Yeah. Golly gee, could spend all day with you, my friend. So we're gonna be wrapping up here for a minute. Do you have any last comments, phrases? I don't want to say last words, but do you have anything that you want to say in conclusion for today's podcast?
Well, I just think that when, since NLP has so many models in it, I think that what we're working with self-directed change work method is kind of consolidating 4 useful models that escalate as complexity sets in. And it just makes all this stuff easier to think about. And so at first, it sounds like it's a very complicated system, but it's really not. And it actually very closely mirrors the kind of experience that we're already having,
right.
Anyway, and the decision dynamics that we're already involved in, and the way that we describe things, so that stress, control, expectations, metaphors, self-talk can all be crafted into something that is, can really be very positively used and, kind of make our way from hesitation, frustration, impatience into a really solid sense of direction, so that when we go for it, we feel much better about what we're doing. And when we, if we run onto the rocky shoals of reality, we have a breadcrumb trail that we can back up and go figure out how to start again or continue from a better place. Life is real and life can be very hard, but there are ways to make it easier. And yes, they take effort and mindfulness, but it can be done with the right understanding and certainly with the right intention. So that's what I'm going for.
That's great. That's really great. Well, thank you once again for such an enlightening and thought-provoking hour, with us here. Appreciate that so much. It's amazing how quickly time flies.
I can't believe it's already been an hour. Thank you, Doug. It's always a pleasure to visit with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So
good times.
Be well. Take care out there in Oregon. And once again, your website is just jimkelly.com, or what is it?
Well, no, I'm at changeworksinstitute.com.
Oh, yeah.
I do have jimislistening.com.
Yeah, Jim is listening. That's it.
Yeah. And I don't know if it's hooked up to Changeworks Institute right now, but now that we've mentioned it live on a podcast, I think I'll tidy that up.
Okay, good.
So, yeah, it's easy.
But for the most part, changeworksinstitute.com is where to go.
That's the place to start. And
Very
we're
cool.
curating a better experience around all of that. It's going to get a lot easier to get involved for people who want to over the course of this year.
And when is your book coming out?
Day before yesterday. No, we're not quite there yet, but we're getting close. We're working in that direction. And I'm always happy to come back and talk to you about NLP, any aspect of NLP, any of the self-directed change work stuff. This is fun.
Cool. Great.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Doug.
This has been the Essential Coaching Skills Podcast. Thank you for being here. It's a pleasure seeing you again. Hope to see you again real soon. Come back next week when we have another gripping and exciting episode of the Essential Coaching Skills Podcast. And if you want to, you can find out more about us, each and every one of us, at essentialcoachingskills.com. Thanks.